Hello and welcome to another week, which means yet another Huddle Breakdown. I'm joined by James and Alan. We are here to reflect on the victory over Hearts and look ahead on recording this on the eve of our return to the Champions League. James, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited. This is, rarely do am I beaming with excitement, and I am beaming with excitement heading into tomorrow.
I can feel it. I can sense it coming through the screen. It's quite overwhelming, actually. Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. It's an exciting week, right? So this is what it's all about, and it's getting real. So yeah, all good.
Yes, it is getting real. I hate to, and we will talk about Slovan Bratislava for the majority of the show, and I hate to be overly optimistic. I'm sure you guys will put me in my place, but in terms of starting the Champions League, it's probably a good place to start. I'll wait and hear your thoughts on that later. But we'll start with the victory over Hearts. Obviously, anybody watching this will know Celtic beat Hearts 2-0 at home this weekend in a rare Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff. James, I'll come to you first. Before we look at Celtic specifically, we did a fair bit of bashing of the Hearts team last week, and rightly so, and their manager and the position they find themselves in. I have to admit, though, that I did think they put up a fair bit of resistance. I don't know how much of that was down to our own lack of creativity or whether they did nail something in terms of the way they sat deep. What was your impressions of Hearts and how they handled the majority of the match?
So I actually was, they actually lined up and played much the way that I fear that opponents will against us, particularly at Celtic Park, meaning that they were relatively deep and relatively passive. And what do I mean by passive? It's not that they're not defending or putting pressure on the ball. It's that they're a little more narrow, less expansive, and particularly defending wide. So, we joked over the last few weeks about how some of our opposition would have 3 or 4 defenders out with our wide players close to the touchline. And the amount of space that creates for people like Hatate and, at one point O'Reilly to patrol and pick up space and pick up the ball and then create. And they were less expansive in that way, and that was reflected in some of the data metrics. Their aggressiveness in engaging the ball was pretty low. Actually, I think it was the lowest of the weekend in all of the fixtures in the league. So generally speaking, that's when I start to get worried about these kind of drab 0-0 type of crap games that you get every season where, you just have a bad day finishing and or face a keeper that, does a good job with stopping some shots, that kind of thing. So I think they made it harder for us. I don't think we played particularly well. Some of our players, I think, had off days. Some of that, I think, was a product of how they set up, looking to defend the way that they did. But they sacrificed things in that regard. His selection was geared towards being kind of negative, which, again, I don't necessarily blame him. But I think he could have done it with some more threatening players, because basically they created a lot of transitions off of our poor passing, and then just flushed that down the toilet. I mean, they were really dreadful in transition and being able to capitalize on some of the misplaced passing that we were playing. So, and Al and I talk all the time about the magic 1 non-penalty XG threshold. And I think they were right just under it for the game. And we always talk about that as the point in which you get kind of inside that threshold where you risk, dropping points. And, in an alternative universe is, we're talking about fine margins. We always say that. We had a penalty, obviously scored it. And then the second goal, and this is the last thing I'll throw out there, we're now up to 5 goals scored on the season in the league campaign on shots from 20 yards or longer on only 1.5 XG. So that's early 2019-20 Ryan Christie level scoring from outside the box. And we all know how that finished. Is he kept shooting and he kept shooting, and eventually those stopped going in. So in an alternate universe, when you don't get those kind of goals going in from 20 yards and you don't get a penalty on the day, and or Hearts actually finish on a cross that's right in front of the goal, which was really their only good chance of the game. That's how you formula. That's the formula for how we drop points in the league, particularly at home, because we play well enough to be the clear better team, but just not quite far enough to push it out where kind of, as we call it, the normal variance, where you end up in a draw. So this was one of those kind of games where the score line was relatively comfortable, but it was close enough that it could have been uncomfortable, had kind of just normal variance type stuff went against us instead of in our favor.
Yeah, Alan, I just wanted to pick up on that with you as well, before we talk about Celtic specifically. This theme of teams sort of parking the bus, for want of a better phrase, or certainly sitting very deep, trying to either hit us on the break or something like that, is something we've come up against both under Ange Postecoglou, under Brendan previously, and is something that we struggle with. Did you see anything in the game on Saturday that concerned you about our ability to break that down against other teams going forward? Just considering how poor Hearts have been so far this season as well.
I suppose mildly. I mean, I listened to one Hearts podcast afterwards because I was interested on their take on it, and they described their own supporters described it as they parked a bus and then a double decker in front of the bus in terms of their approach. I disagree slightly with James in that I think they tried to play as high as they possibly could, and they tried to squeeze the game up as high as they dare. So they weren't falling back onto the edge of their own box. They did eventually end up there, just through the weight of Celtic possession. But I think their intention was to try and stay as high as they could. What they were really impressive, actually, in fact, one of the most impressive displays I've seen, and it's because, as James says, by not pressing the ball aggressively, the Hearts players were focusing on their own shape, and they were so compact. There was wafer thin space between the lines, and they maintained that discipline both vertically and horizontally as a unit. They didn't go. Nobody broke ranks to go chasing the ball like a little puppy. They kept their shape and they kept their compactness, and they moved up backwards and forwards together. The only problem, as James says, is when you've literally got all 11 players in that shape, and they did win the ball. You've got Shankland in the middle of the Celtic half, and you got Vargas trying to get forward on his own, and Carter Vickers just had a field day in terms of posting enormously positive defensive stats, fielding any long balls that they lumped up. So that was their problem. They were never going to get out. But as long as it, as James says, as long as it stayed 1-0, then, or even 0-0, there was always that chance. And I do have to, we talked last week effusively about Alistair Johnson. And guess what? And James said, yeah, but sometimes he gives away fouls in stupid positions, and guess what? He gave away a foul in a stupid position on the right hand side, and from that they had a header at goal. From the corner was the corner that led to the handball incident. Now clearly the ball hit Scales on the shoulders, so even by that criteria and by distance, it was never going to be a penalty. But nevertheless, two hairy moments from that one stupid free kick, and then the great chance they had, Brahmi, very late in the game, was another Alistair Johnson mistake in the right back position that allowed Spittle to break, cross into the box, and that was a great chance. He actually didn't make a good job of that. And that was it. That was at 1-0.
I'm blaming you, Alan. You jinxed them.
so James, kudos to James for calling that right in terms of Alistair Johnson was one of those that I think had a poor game. But having said that, to balance that out, Johnson did create 4 chances in the game as well. So going forward, he was actually pretty good. I do want to spend some time, and maybe this is the next, teeing up the next bit of this, talking about maybe Engels, because he was the man of the match as far as the stadium was concerned, and obviously had got a lot of the publicity in the game. But in terms of how effective Hearts were in being so compact, Rio Hatate completed one pack pass, one pack pass. The whole game, he managed once to thread a pass through that took anybody out of the game.
I have to say, Alan, just to jump in on that, even as somebody who didn't review the stats afterwards, I think that was extremely obvious to just on observing the game. I could not believe how wasteful he was with the ball. Actually, there was a suggestion that perhaps Bernardo will take up a place in the Champions League game against Slovan Bratislava, to which my response was, as long as it's for Hatate, that's fine by me, because it was, and I like him, but and what he does do, he does very well occasionally, and he's a risk taker, but he was so wasteful with the possession against Hearts.
So I mentioned that actually not because I wanted to highlight Hatate particularly. Engels only had four pack passes, right? The point being that Hearts were so effective at compressing the space that Celtic's two creative midfielders struggled to get any traction in terms of breaking them down. They forced Celtic wide. Maeda and Kuhn got a lot of the ball. Kuhn did pretty well, actually. I mean, watching the game live, I felt the same as you did about Hatate, in that I thought he was incredibly wasteful. Kuhn, but at least he set up 4 chances. He also set up 4 secondary assisting passes for other chances as well. So actually, Kuhn did a pretty good job in terms of the balls that he had. Maeda didn't create so much. He had a lot of the ball, actually. They were very successful getting the ball to Maeda. It was almost as if they were happy for Maeda to have the ball. He did set up a couple of chances. They weren't particularly great ones. And he didn't create 2 pack passes from Maeda. Yeah, so that's 2 from Maeda, 4 from Engels, 1 from Hatate. So, as I say, not to particularly bash any player at all. That wasn't what my point. My point was that I thought Hearts did a really good job. So kudos to Naismith from that, but it was almost exclusively to the detriment of their attacking play. But then again, I don't think they really cared, because essentially every single free kick they got, every single throw-in they got, irrespective of where in the field it was, they were going to take their time, we're going to get their centre-backs up, and we're just going to launch it as hard and high as they could. I mean, it was very, very sort of League One stuff in that regard. But what you can say with Naismith is he had a plan. He put the right players in the field to execute that plan. Yes, it didn't work, and actually, when they put their creative players on, threw them all onto the pitch, like you vomited as creative players onto the pitch in the last 10 minutes, they actually did start to control the game. And that last 10 minutes from Celtic was not the best. It was glossed over by McCowan's first goal and by the goal that was disallowed, which would have made it 3-0. So it was a bit of a strange one, I in the sense that all the XG, all that looks good, big difference and all that. But I look back over that last 10 minutes thinking, oh, this isn't good. We're not controlling this. We've lost control of the game, but gloss was put on it that made it all seem all right. I think there was probably a international break hangover for some players, the likes of Johnson, maybe a lot of travel, etc. And I also felt that maybe on Rodgers there was a little bit of an attitude of, we're just going to manage ourselves through this game and we're going to do just enough. Because from 1-0 out, actually, we weren't throwing players forward and we weren't playing quickly. We were playing in a very safe, controlled way. So I think there was a little bit of Rodgers going, he talked about this 6-game block, and I think he's got his mindset on, right, we're going to win these 6 games, the big games on Wednesday, and he's going to manage his team through that. So I think we played a little bit within ourselves by design. I might be being overly optimistic by attributing that, but that was just my feeling. Allied to the fact that maybe the international break meant there were a few tired bodies and minds as well.
See, this is the problem with jumping in and interrupting Alan when he's in the middle of making a point, is I think I know where he's going. I jump in and go all in, and then it's not where he was going at all. So
see, if you were a footballer, Laura, you'd be Cammy Devlin. I think. Oh yeah. I think he's going that way. So I'm going to launch in as fast as I can. Oh, he's gone. Oh shit!
Yeah, you sent me for a hot dog with that one, Alan. I'll say that. James, Alan's mentioned him. What better time than to talk about him? Our new man, Arne Engels. I have a feeling, Alan, there's a bit of subtext to what Alan said there about he was the man of the match in the stadium. We'll come back to Alan on that in a little bit. What were your impressions of the new man overall? Like, he obviously got the penalty. The fact that he even had the balls to take it off Hatate, I think, says something about his character. But what did you make of his on-field performance?
Yeah, so he was fine. I think he was who I thought he was. Let's put it that way. Meaning that I think that we talked about this when he was signed. He's not a Matt O'Reilly replacement in a lineal sense. He's a totally different type of player. His relative strengths and weaknesses are very different. So you saw the upside of that, which is his running, his kind of raw athleticism, his ability to get into the box, into space. He's kind of got that final third explosiveness in movement, which is good. That's part of what Alan and I have been asking for as far as a box-to-box 8 with that kind of raw athleticism in particularly in Europe. But you also saw, I thought, some of his limitations on the ball. And it was, as Alan said, this was a systemic challenge for the team. So the fact that our midfield broadly failed at, breaking their lines, which again, that's what they were saying. There's just always things that you can take one or two things away, and then that creates vulnerabilities in other aspects of the game. So what they looked to take away, they were relatively, dare I say, they won the battle of the midfield. No, I'm not going to say that.
Careful.
Is they basically looked to nullify us in a way that I think, and I agree with Alan, I think Naismith deserves some credit, in a way that was coherent. And we had trouble dealing with it. And I think Engels was someone who struggled in that way. And if I'm going, this is a concern I have talked about recently, and why I thought this game, and more importantly, analytically, why I'm so excited about tomorrow is that Bratislava, and we'll get into that in the next segment, is I think going to present a challenge that's similar to what Hearts did, more skillfully and probably better managed. At least that there's a scenario where that could take place. So I think we might have a creative deficit in midfield now, particularly on a day when Hatate is not shooting the lights out. And because you can't swap Engels' profile out for Matt O'Reilly and expect kind of that, from the 18 to the 18, whether it's build up and or because we talk about creativity in multiple ways. It's not just the pass that precedes the shot, which is kind of statistically how most people characterize it. So things like that, Alan's pack passing and the scoring that he does there, that encapsulates that ability to break lines through vision, spatial intelligence, movement. And my concern is the midfield mix with a Bernardo, with an Engels, who doesn't look like that's their relative strength. And so how that kind of fits together and pieces together, particularly against teams that look to set up, I've been calling it really since Ange's first season, the St. Mirren model, because they're the first ones that kind of deploy it against Ange, which is narrow, relatively deep, and not aggressive, kind of passive and not getting out of shape or allowing yourself to get out of shape. So I wouldn't expect Engels. That doesn't look like that's his strength, and he kind of showed that in this game. But he also showed what he is probably a strength, which is his movement and raw athleticism.
Yeah, Alan, I'm probably going to use a few turns of phrase and words here that you will probably have heard a lot of times before about players, and then the figures don't back up. But I felt like he operated with a confidence and a swagger that is very rarely seen in a player of that age, and I don't think was in any way overawed by the crowd or by the occasion. And much the opposite, actually. When the penalty went in, he turned around and G'd the crowd up even more. So I was encouraged by some of that in terms of the confidence that I saw in him and where that could potentially take him because I would rather have a player that way than the other way. But I do take on board some of James's more measured assessments of his performance. Where do you stand on that as far as Engels is concerned?
So I think that this was most of the times when we've ended up getting into tangles with fellow Celtic supporters has been because there's a gulf between how some people see the game through their eyes and what they remember from watching the game in the stadium, and how we see the game having looked at multiple data sources. Because I don't just collect my own data. I study the Opta data and I study StatsBomb data. And I fill in gaps and I look to see for consistencies and inconsistencies, actually, between the different data sources to try and understand. Because I'm interested in why that would be and the methodologies and all that good stuff. And this is probably an extreme example of this as you will ever likely see. The fact that he was given man of the match in the stadium and everybody was like hyper excited afterwards. So I get that at a human level, right? £11 million player. And I agree with actually with everything you've said, Laura. He looked very confident. He looked very assured. For a young kid, record signing, first start for the club in a sticky fixture, I thought he really didn't look out of place at all. He didn't look like he was struggling with nerves, struggling with the occasion, any of that. That's all good, and I completely accept that. The problem that he had was he kept turning the ball over, and in really bad areas, right? So Celtic had 20 what I call pack turnovers. This is where you turn the ball over either because a misplaced pass or you get caught on the ball, or in some other respect give the ball away, and it means that your teammates are out of the game to varying degrees. And to varying degrees is where you score it, and the higher the score, the worse it is. Okay, and he got caught 5 times with 5 pack turnovers. The team had 23. Now 23 is up there with the worst that Celtic have ever had since I started recording this. And we're talking Leipzig away. We're talking losing 3-0 at Ibrox. We're talking 4-2 at Hibs. We're talking the 3-3.
Stop.
We're talking the 3-3 Scottish Cup semi-final against Aberdeen, which went to an extra 30 minutes. We're talking about these sort of games. And there are other anomalies in there, like, for example, 5-0 at home to Morton, where everyone's trying Hollywood passes every few minutes and we give the ball away and all that sort of stuff. But it's generally indicative of either a very effective press by the opposition, that wasn't the case here, or it's to do with players running into blind alleys, not knowing what to do, getting caught in possession. And that was more the case here. And he actually had an overall packing score, so taking in the round, passing, dribbling, receiving, turnovers, recoveries. He had an overall packing score of 9. Only the next lowest was Schmeichel at 17. Now goalkeepers don't generally get packing scores apart from a couple of odd passes, right? So 9 is really, really low. For context, the highest was Greg Taylor at 84, right? So Matt O'Reilly last season averaged 98. Now again, it's one game, and it was his debut, and so all that. But what it serves to do in terms of sort of dampening people's ardour a little bit is just highlight what James says is, on first viewing, and it's very early days, he struggled to progress the ball through the lines. He struggled to maintain possession when faced with not so much a high press, but just being forced into traffic and having a lot of players around him. So that's not a disaster. I think many aspects of his performance were good. I think, if anything, he profiles more like Paulo Bernardo in the sense of he's very athletic, he's defensively really good, he reads the game well, he gets up and down well, he get onto the box, he got into some great positions, all that, yeah. But you do need from your midfielders the ability to break the lines and to pass through teams. Hatate didn't do it at the weekend, and neither did Engels. So that's one of the areas that Celtic really struggled. Which is why when we come to talk about the Slovan game, and you think about we're at home against a team that's likely to sit in and likely to be fairly compact and very well organised, you do need that lock picker. And therefore, I'd be a bit nervous if it was Engels and Bernardo. You do need Hatate to be on it and to be the one that does it. Now, my criticism of Hatate isn't actually that he gives the ball away too much. My criticism of Hatate is 2 things. One is defensively he's too easy to run past, and he doesn't cover his space well aggressively enough. And second is he doesn't do enough. He doesn't do enough aggressive passing. when he does do it and it comes off, it's beautiful and we all love it. I want to see more of that. We need to see more pack passes from him, more accurate through balls. So I'm not. This isn't a criticism of Engels. I'm not down on him. There was so much to admire about his performance. I thought, and a lot of it was to do with his attitude and his confidence, like you said, that you wouldn't necessarily see from the data. Absolutely, but that packing data is incredibly important for those reasons, because when you play against teams that hunker down and sit in a low block, you need people that can pick their way through the lines like that. And he didn't show that on that day. He did show the capability to break the game by getting into the box, and that's different. That is also something. If he can be found in the box, he's a big guy. He's 6 foot odd. He's strong. He's got good technique. You find him in the box, and we saw with that shot that hit the post. That was fantastic technique. So there are other ways to do this, and he will support that. But if ever you want an example of eye test versus data, this was a great example.
We could talk about Arne Engels all day, I'm sure, but we are going to move on to the next section of the show, which is the Champions League preview, which we'll do so just after this. James, I'll come to you first on the Champions League preview. We are playing Slovan Bratislava, the team from Slovakia, I presume. I have looked up.
This is going really well.
This is going well. No, actually, I did look. I think there's a danger sometimes. Obviously, you guys won't be familiar with this, but as a football ignoramus, there is a danger of being that type of person going, well, I don't really know anything about them, so they must be rubbish. Having looked a little bit into it, they have come through 3 qualifying rounds, 2 of which included Apoel and Midfield. Midfield being a team who have some Champions League pedigree and who we ourselves have struggled to overcome before. They have won 5 out of their opening 6 matches in the Slovak top division. And there is a little anomaly that I've noticed that I'll maybe get into if one of you guys touches on it. But James, as our Champions League opener, what do you think of the opponents that we're going to come up against in Slovan Bratislava?
I'll start with some of the objective, which is stuff that other people have done. So there's a site called I think it's The Analyst. It's run by Opta. Alan tweeted one of their stories out. They've done some really cool preview articles and analysis over the last couple of weeks ahead of the new Champions League format, including that Celtic got the easiest draw in the entire field, which is, I think, interesting. That Bratislava, they do these things with simulations, like 50,000 simulations or whatever. Bratislava is the only team, I think, or one of the only teams that didn't get any wins and didn't win the Champions League in any of the simulations. So that means that we won a simulation Champions League. Whoever
Really?
says it's impossible.
Even 50,000, that's incredible.
That's right. Even if it was 1 Allen. So you're telling me there's a chance. Bratislava is broadly considered the weakest team in the field. We're playing them at home first. We got a very easy, favorable overall draw. Again, it's not to say that we're not facing really good teams. All of these teams are good. To your point, Laura, Bratislava just won their 6th league championship in a row. Doesn't matter what country you're playing in, it's, decent footballing nation. If you win 6 leagues in a row, that's saying something. Their manager, I believe, has some history against Celtic. So other people have written about dating back a few years. I mentioned this, I think, last week in a 5-4 result going back to Gordon Strachan's first season. 5-0 was the first one. 4-0 was the second one. And they went through 5-4. Another objective way to kind of gauge this is if you look at things like ELO, they're in the neighborhood of teams that we've struggled with in the past. So again, it's not as if these guys are minnows, quote unquote. I think that would be insulting to them. They're of a level like a Cluj, like a Maribor, Molde, kind of in that tier of quality, smaller opponents who just don't have the resources. So they're an echelon above Hearts, I would say. They're above Aberdeen as far as quality goes, and what they've been able to do on the pitch. And as you said, I mean, they just beat Midtjylland, and Midtjylland are a good side, very well-run team. They're smaller compared to us, so this has always been our criticism, is that we're punching below our weight to the level of a Midtjylland with twice their resources, and Bratislava is like a notch below that in resources, or even two notches below. So they do a very good job with the level of player that they have, with the resources that they have. So I'll echo, and some of this is just kind of pat manager speak, but what Roger said in his press conference, taking them seriously, giving them respect. I actually think that it's legitimate in this case. I mean, this is not a team that you can just sleepwalk through a performance and they're not going to hurt you, because they've got the ability and the capability to do that. And I actually think it's, from a chessboard perspective, if their manager sets up similar to what Hearts did, and he's a bright guy. He's a tinkerer. We talked about this last week, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here. He's not someone who just he's the opposite of Ange Postecoglou. You don't know what you're going to get out of this guy, so it depends on how he decides that he wants to try and combat how we're going to set up. So there's some uncertainty there, but if he comes up with the right formula, quote unquote, I think it could be a really tough matchup, just from a style perspective, in their ability to hit us on the counter, and some quality from distance. They have some guys that have been pretty good shooting from distance, that kind of thing.
Yeah, just to add a bit of context to what you were saying there, for anybody who doesn't know or hasn't read the multiple pieces, the manager of Slovan Bratislava is a certain Vladimir Weiss, who was the manager of Art Media Bratislava in the match that they defeated us all those years ago, as James touched on. His son, Vladimir Weiss Jr., is an ex-Rangers player, the old version, not the new version, RIP. And they are both going to have an agenda of their own, I'm sure, to try and beat us. James touched on it there, Alan, this unpredictability about the way that they might turn up. It's reflected in some of the results that you see when you look through their early games. I was looking at one there, and I can't remember which way round it was, but there was 2 games back-to-back, one in the Slovak Cup and one in the league. They won one of them 5-0, and they lost the other one 5-0, like back-to-back. From the opening 6 games where they've won 5 of them, they only have a goal difference of +3. So there's a kind of, as James said, unpredictability, and almost kind of a we'll score more than you attitude. Does that bode well for us in terms of any potential defensive fragilities we might be able to expose?
Yeah. I mean, listen, possibly. I mean, they started playing competitive football on the 10th of July, right? So they've played 15 games actually, the cup game already this season. So that's quite a lot of data, and also Vladimir Weiss, the manager, definitely fits into that category of sort of the classic wily old fox type of manager, which is a cliche that we reserve almost exclusively for Eastern European. Central European managers, I think. But as James says, they've played 4-3-3, 3-4-3, 4-2-3-1, 4-4-2, 4-2-1-3. There's virtually not a formation that hasn't been tried in those 16 games. He also rotates the squad to an incredible degree. Now, some of that might be because, I guess, the Slovakian league, to your point about those 2 5-0 games, the depth is probably not great. It's only a small country, so they came off the back of that Midtjylland Champions League qualifier and had to play then Zilnia, who are second in the league to them, and it looks like what happened was those players couldn't manage 2 big games in such close proximity, and they pretty much physically collapsed in that Zilnia game. And then the cup match was against a lesser side. So consequently, in their last league game at the weekend, they rested most of their top players and got away with a 2-1 win. So, because I don't think they're just used to playing with that intensity. Listening to a Slovakian journalist on the Celtic Fans TV, he thought that strong starting 11 that they will put out, and it will be a very experienced starting 11. It'll be average age of 30 plus, with some players that you'll recognise from some of the international tournaments. These are not, as James says, this is a serious team, but they probably don't have the depth. So, given their age, given the lack of depth, given they're not used to playing, I don't think, at high intensity, because they don't look like they're a high pressing team. Celtic need to play with the intensity that we didn't see so much against Hearts. Maybe part of that was deliberate, but we need to get back on the front foot in terms of playing at the speed that Rodgers wants us to play against this team, and really sort of pin them back as much as possible. And I think the longer the game, we may have to be patient. The longer the game goes on, it may take 70 minutes to break them down. But listen, we've got to respect this team. Weiss is a very experienced manager. He's taken the Slovak national team into major tournaments, and they've always punched above their weight. He's got very experienced players. The guy Kuka, he's 37. I don't even know if he'll play, but he was tremendous for Slovakia in the Euros as a holding midfielder. They've got some. Yeah, Stuart Ross did a good article today in the Celtic Way that I recommend you check out. Their strongest side is their right side. They've got a strong overlapping attacking fullback, Blackman, and they've got a winger. I think it's Barsegan. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Who's got 6 goals and 6 league games down that right hand side. We know that that's our problem position in terms of midfield to defending. So that's another one to be mindful of. But listen, let's not be overly negative. This is the lowest ranked team that we will play. I agree with James. You'd probably characterise them as better than Hearts. We've been quite fortunate in the draw. There's 3 teams that we play that have got a lower ELO score than us in this section of 8 games. ELO score is something which is like it reflects results, and it reflects the result versus the strength of the opposition, and it's an ongoing rolling score. It's much better. It seems to be far more accurate than, for example, UEFA rankings. So that ELO score is quite useful. They've got the lowest one. We've got them at home. They've never played in the Champions League before. A Slovakian team hasn't played in any form of the Champions League, top flight, for about 12 years. So this is a big deal for them, and we're at home. So they played 4 qualifiers to get here. So in those 4 qualifiers, they only averaged 44% possession. And bearing in mind they're playing against some fairly small clubs, and they got I don't have XG numbers apart from the Midtjylland games, but they were outshot 52-35 across those 8 matches. So they got away with it a little bit in some of these ties. Especially Midtjylland, where the XG was, I think, 2.7 to them, 3.6 to Midtjylland. So one other feature is, although they may not have the depth, and they may not be a team that has a lot of energy for an intense 90-minute match, the one thing they definitely do have is resilience, which you'd expect from an older side. They score a lot of late goals. They've won a lot of league games late on. They've won a few of the European ties with late goals. So that's something to be mindful of, and another reason why we need to run them off their feet as much as possible and play with a real intensity and really try and drive them back. So I think Celtic have to win, right? They have to win this game. Rodgers spoke today quite confidently, said this is the best prepared he's felt going into a Champions League or European campaign at Celtic. Low ball is no more, right? Those excuses don't exist anymore. The team is in a good place. Right, the squad is fit. We don't have any injury concerns as far as I'm aware. Everybody's available. We've been playing 1 game a week on the main, and we look confident. We look together. We look coherent. This is a great chance for 3 points, so it needs to be taken.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what you're saying there, and I think it's one of those situations where if we can't expect or look for a result in this game, there's no point in us being in the tournament, really, because like you say, they are one of the lowest ranked teams in the tournament. Although when you mentioned ELO or whatever it was called. I was thinking of my dad's CD collection and ELO. Yeah, I'll not embarrass my dad any further by outing him and his musical tastes. James, we are going to get on to the financials that have been released this week by Celtic and dive into those a little bit to close the show. But before we do that, and Alan, I'll ask you to jump in at any point, I just wanted to give a bit of wider context to where we are with the Champions League. Alan touched on it with the rankings of some of the teams that were playing. For anybody who needs a reminder, we've obviously got Slovan Bratislava tomorrow night at Celtic Park. That's followed up by an away leg against Dortmund, then away against Atlanta, home to Leipzig, home to Club Brugge, away to Dinamo Zagreb, and then home to Young Boys, and closing out with a game in Birmingham against Aston Villa. I think based on that, I remember when the draw was made, I was sort of saying, well, we have to look for at least 9 points, being Slovan Bratislava, Zagreb, and who's the other one? Young Boys, with a potential that we could maybe look at trying to get 12 from the home game against Club Brugge. Is that a realistic target, do you think? Is that a bit ambitious, considering, there are parts of our record that would suggest that even a game away against Dinamo Zagreb might be tricky for us given our away record?
I would say if the collective sentiment towards the quality of our squad is in the neighborhood of being reality, with the manager that we have, that should be the base case expectation. I think the concern that I have is the risk around that talent, and the fit of that talent relative to the style of play that we play. It's unproven, and so this is why, there's the fan part of it, which is just really exciting because, when's the last we are actually the third highest favorite going in for the first round of fixtures here going into tomorrow. So the only two clubs that are bigger favorites in their ties are Real Madrid and Bayern Munich. Okay, so that gives you
basically what you're saying is we're getting to the semi-final.
Exactly. We're in a time machine. That's what I'm saying. When we're being uttered with those two teams, but that gives you an idea of where Bratislava is on the pecking order and how far they are as far as being kind of a clear last as far as the power rankings of the teams in the competition. So absolutely. I mean, this is why we have to win tomorrow. And when's the last time you could say that within a European context, outside of, again, some Champions League qualifiers against, get some PTSD here, against Cluj, against Ferencváros, right? So we've seen this nightmare before. And so this obviously doesn't have that knockout component, but from a like a buildup of like two colliding worlds, if our worlds collide here tomorrow and we don't play the way that we should or think we could, and win, and probably win like decisively. I mean, that's how it should happen here. Like this is you don't go in the third highest favorite and luck your way into a variance win. Like this should be a comfortable performance tomorrow if all goes as we hope and plan. If it deviates from that, then it becomes more concerning, I think, from an overall campaign perspective in the Champions League, and some of these issues around talent and fit and kind of the collective assessment of how the window went, I think would then start to fall into question. That's part of why I'm excited from an analytical perspective, is I have my kind of biases and my theories, but there's very low conviction on any of that, meaning that we just don't, because Engels never played in a team that plays the way we do, at least at a senior level. Like even his time at Club Brugge 2 was not really in a possession dominant attacking type team that we're going to, probably manifest tomorrow again against a side that's, as Alan said, isn't going to really be bothered by not having the ball. So 65, 70% type of possession tomorrow wouldn't be surprising. So yeah, it's going to be a tremendous test. It should be a test that we pass with flying colors, but it's also going to be potentially problematic in a lot of different ways if we don't do that.
Yeah, Alan, just to close out the Champions League discussion, 9 to 12 points, is that achievable in your opinion?
It is, but it is precarious. I mean, even having statistically, as according to the models from Opta and so forth, the easiest draw in the whole tournament, we are, through the simulations that James mentioned from the same sort of data vendors, we're only just fitting into 24th place, which is the last qualifying place. That's how precarious this is for a club like Celtic. Now, some of that's to do with historical Celtic performances in Europe, I think, and then that'd be another reason possibly to, if we could get some wins and maybe get the unexpected draw in Italy or Germany, for example, we'd start to sort of build our coefficient as well as our ELO score, and perhaps we would give ourselves a bit more hope in that regard. But the way the fixtures fall will be interesting. We've clearly got this one, which is by far the easiest tie we could possibly have got in the whole tournament, and then we've got three very, very, very difficult games after that. Interestingly, as we record, so this is Tuesday evening, Aston Villa are actually 2-0 up at Young Boys. Now, that's the reason I mention that is because we play Young Boys 7th and Aston Villa 8th. So that's actually a great result for us, because if Aston Villa are done and dusted and qualified and happy by the time we play them, then they, because of the rigours of the English Premier League, they may well play. Not a weakened team might be stretching it, but certainly they may not play their Saturday team against us, which would be great. And Young Boys, we play them at home, and if they're losing 2-0 at home to Aston Villa, we play them. Hopefully that they'll be struggling by the time we play them. All ifs and buts, we don't know. But I can only echo what James says. To not win tomorrow would be very, very concerning, given. But it is a football match, and it is against a team that they're going to be a level which is higher than what we probably play in the Scottish Premier League, in all honesty. So this isn't like going to be a 3-4-0, right? But we should still be comfortable being at home. And if we're not, then we're back to hoping to probably pick up something in a place that we don't expect to pick up points.
The last thing I'll say just real quick is I didn't dive into him deeply, but just from what I looked at, they have one of these big bastard keepers, these 6'5" dudes with a long wingspan. And, the data in Y-Scout isn't great for keepers, but he's got over 12,000 minutes, and he's in his mid-20s, so he's played a lot at that age. And his data is pretty good. So, the idea that he could be a decent shot stopper, like I doubt he's going to be, Schmeichel on the ball. But, if the plan is to bunker and counter and, we're going to get some chances against them, even with them doing that. They're not, a great defensive team from what I've seen. But, they might have a keeper that could give us a rough day as well, at least theoretically. He certainly profiles as capable of doing that. So I just thought I'd throw that out there too as another reason to not think this is going to be a cakewalk. That they're going to pose some legitimate obstacles.
So breaking news, guys, that's James saying the Bratislava keeper has a high expected bastard score.
That's right.
That's interesting, and one I'll definitely be keeping an eye on. Back after this with some of our favourite things, financials. Wow, love it. James, we'll come to you on the financials. Celtic have produced some facts and figures this week that you had quite a bit of interest in when you were breaking them down and doing your sums, as you like to do. As somebody with a base knowledge of these types of things, and looking at the way we've done transfers and the way we've published figures in the past, I just think we're absolutely loaded. Did these figures support that statement or that sort of understanding of Celtic's current financial position?
Yeah, I think we're so loaded that we're trying to not show how loaded we are, potentially. Potentially. Now, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, and with the caveat is, without being an inside person, one never knows exactly what vendor arrangements are, contracts are, what the receivable schedule is, the payable schedule. So all I can do.
I can say this, James. I'm sure we've paid all the face painters. I'm sure.
Well, I'll take your word for that. But so what was interesting, I found is, and this started with the interim report. In most business contexts, you're trying to show the most positive light when you take a snapshot, and that's what these are. These are a snapshot in time as of June 30th. So that's what the balance sheet is. So the balance sheet is a snapshot. The income statement shows what happened over the period. Similarly, what the cash flow statement does. So the balance sheet snapshot, which is what most reporters, I think, look at, and they look at that cash number, and that's the number that I think understandably gets used to launch into tirades about cheap Tory boards and all this other stuff that the people running Celtic have to deal with. And again, I'm not making a judgment there. I'm just saying this is a practical reality. So there is an incentive structure here for people at Celtic, I would argue, to say, you know what, it wouldn't be the worst thing if we paid a few of our bills earlier than we might have to by contract, and push that cash number down a little bit. And so I see a scenario where that could have been part of what they did. I'm not saying that is for sure, but some of their accounts payable numbers were down a lot, and some of them that aren't current, meaning that numbers that things that probably aren't due like within the next 12 months went down like in the millions, many millions. So again, I don't know the details, but I could see a scenario where they would want to do that. And I don't necessarily blame them for that either. Like, this is not, but the moral of the story is, I think our actual cash level might even be a little high. Like, our functional cash level might be higher than what was reported in the financial statements. So we might even be better off than we think or hope.
Yeah, Alan, I was sweating a little bit there halfway through James talking, because I thought he was going to say the Tories won the midfield battle, and I was absolutely terrified, because if you say that about Rangers is one thing, but the other lot could be a whole different ballgame, but we'll steer clear of that one. Listening to James talk about that, I think it brings into context, as an emotional Celtic supporter, you want cash to be splashed on players like Engels. You want investment to be made to better the team on the field, because ultimately that is what we care about. But when you see these figures come out, it is encouraging, isn't it? Given we have such a close reminder of what can happen when there are people who don't put that thought into the financial running of your club, what can happen. It is encouraging to see that we have people who we might not necessarily always agree with their opinions, but they are doing their best to keep the club in the best of health.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no doubt about that. I mean, if we talk on here about the football operations, and I still maintain that some of that money needs to go into the football operations department to make things like sports science, fitness, health, analytics, all of that, data scouting, all of that stuff to be the absolute best it can be. I mean, even Hearts are looking to hook up with Tony Bloom's data company to improve their scouting operation in that regard. So and it's interesting, by the way, that they selected Hearts out of all the Scottish clubs that they could have selected. So there's vast room for improvement here. But outside of the football operations, the rest of the football club is run exceptionally well on a commercial basis, and on a business basis, as exemplified by these results. I doubt there's a football club in Europe that has as much cash as Celtic in the bank. I mean, there may not be one actually, and could evidence those results on a year-on-year basis. And this is a kind of a problem. It's a kind of problem for Celtic, because they can't just keep buying players. I mean, they've got to be mindful of FSR. They've got to be mindful that the cost side can't just keep going up and up and up. There will be years, maybe next year, for example, where we don't get into the Champions League because that the coefficients and so forth are such that direct entry will go next year, in all likelihood, and therefore there'll be qualifying rounds, and we all know the jeopardy that involved in that. So we're in a position where we can take the hit of if that happens, and we don't get into the Champions League for 2 or 3 years, maybe, such as the cash position, such as the asset value of the squad, that wouldn't be anywhere near catastrophic. It would just be more of an inconvenience probably for Celtic, and they could probably trade their way back to break even at least. Would we like to see Celtic commit to more capital projects? Absolutely. They're doing that. There are various projects on the go as far as Lennox Town and also the stadium upgrades are concerned. I would like to see some statement of vision at least, or strategies regards the main stand renovation and turning Celtic into that sort of 5-star UEFA level ground. It would be expensive, at least 100 million probably, to do that. But if ever there's a time to do it, I mean, I know James says interest rates are high and costs are mushrooming, so maybe it's not the best time to do that. And we've got a very conservative board. That's a judgment call. I could see and listen to an argument either way on that one. But what I'd like to see at least is a statement of vision on that, and something that there may be following plans on that one. As far as Scotland's concerned, this is a real problem. Celtic are literally in a league of one at the moment, and for the foreseeable future financially. And if financial performance is reflected on the park performance, and guess what? It usually is. Then the rest of the league are looking at being basically playing their own league essentially for second place for the foreseeable. That's an appalling view for them to take in, really, so for some more than others, depending on your levels of cognitive dissonance. So it's not great for the health of Scottish football, and it's not great for the health of the league, but that isn't Celtic's problem. That is for other clubs to improve and to get better. And great to see, as I say, the announcement yesterday that Hearts are linking up with Tony Bloom's data organisation. That is a step in the right direction. Let's hope that the likes of Aberdeen and Hibs kind of follow suit. So, but bear in mind, right, UEFA FSR precludes the sugar daddy route. You're not going to get somebody coming in and suddenly throwing hundreds of millions at something. You can't do that anymore. So the way Celtic are operating is sustainable. It is sustainable, and that's the key term. So hallelujah for that. Is everything perfect? No, it never is. We'll always have an opinion on things that go better. But at the moment, as I say, Celtic are in a league of one, and they need to manage themselves, I would say, a little bit less conservatively from that position of strength, and just loosen things a little bit, just to secure both the infrastructure and and of the football club and its environments, so that it's set that should the football landscape change and there is a European League, Pan-European League, etc. We're there with a state-of-the-art stadium, state-of-the-art facilities, such that we can then attract ever better players.
Yeah, I mean, they should be able to fund the revamp of the stand off of the money I paid for my nephew's strip in the superstore this
Was that
week.
the first one, the second strip, or the third, or was it the fourth strip? The special edition one?
Honest to goodness. No, I didn't have the capital or the credit to go to the bank and take out another mortgage for the other strips, but he's happy. We're going to the Falkirk game at the weekend, so he needed some hoops to go with that. I'll wave to you in the away end, Alan, when I
Anyway. I like your style.
Anyway, thanks very much, James. Thanks, Alan. You guys will be back on Thursday, obviously, with Martin to, I presume, dissect whatever happens with Slovan Bratislava, and to look ahead to the weekend as well. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you listen to, because there's much more to come from the Huddle Breakdown. James, Alan, thank you very much, and we'll see you all again next week.